Okay, so we're going to look at the Civil War, and this is a very complex war. Obviously, it was a very divisive time in our nation's history, and there's a lot to this. So we're going to cover the video portion of this class, and I'm going to do my best to target the readings for the week around the topics I feel are going to be most important for you to keep up with. There are a lot of different types of history classes could be taught with this, but remember, we're speaking specifically from the viewpoint of American military history. So let's jump in. Right up on the home screen, what we see is kind of how the nation kind of broke out and how the nation was divided. And we see what eventually became the Confederate States of America lined up along the bottom in the lighter color here. Virginia down to Texas. The United States of America, or sometimes they're referred to as the Union or the Northern Army, are going to be up here, clearly in the north. Oregon, California fell into this as well. We have 24 Union states, 11 Confederate states that we're going to kind of look at, and it's kind of how we are laid out as this time period begins. So, again, it's a quick recap coming out of the War of 1812, and we moved then through the Mexican War, and we talked about this theme of manifest destiny coming, not really so much out of the War of 1812, but as the Mexican War moves on, manifest destiny, this feeling that America thought they had a divine right to move westward really at any cost. So this was what fueled American expansion, and later it fueled it overseas. So some of the issues that led to the Civil War were created by this expansion, particularly when as the western states started being settled, whether or not they were going to be slave-holding states as they were entered into the Union became critical, became very problematic. So keep that in mind. Again, we talked about the Mexican War last. So something that's key to think about, and as you look at that, is the leaders, the military leaders, men that would go on to serve in the American Civil War, that got really their combat and their leadership experience right here in this war with Mexico. So many leaders emerged, they grew, they bonded, they formed friendships that later would impact them both in recruitment of their friends to come fight with them, and some of them found themselves on opposite sides of the battlefield. Something to think about is the fact that this war is really unique in that leaders on both sides of the battlefield brought basically the same tactics, the same experiences with them as they went to war. So instead of two separate countries with two separate, which we were in for all practical purposes two separate countries because the southern states had seceded from the Union, but and they built their own military as such and left behind what was left of the Union Army that rebuilt and made itself. But the foundation was identical for both armies. Same leaders, same military schools, same battlefield experiences in the war with Mexico as they moved forward. Rapid small arms advancements in this time period. We did not see a ton of advancements from the War of 1812 up to the Mexican War, but we start from the Mexican War era on and really through the late 1800s and even into the first part of the 1900s. We see rapid advancements, particularly as the old style of a muzzle loader or a smoothbore musket turned into a rifle, and now we're introducing breech loaders into the concept, and something that became critical. And I'll link these YouTube videos to the class notes so you can watch them. I would encourage you to watch every single one of them and maybe write this down and watch them in this order to kind of walk you through the evolution a little bit. But we see revolver become introduced, and that then really amplifies the cavalry's ability to maintain firepower. So that rapid advance on horseback, riding to the battle, whether dismounted or some cavalry officers started adopting a tactic of fighting from horseback. So that really made them much more lethal and really changed the way they approached much of this. But we really see by the end of the Civil War, repeating rifles. We see repeating rifles become used. Breech loading single-shot rifles were not uncommon at all, and the accuracy, the distance at which they were lethal and effective combat weapons became very much more pronounced. What we see is that as these weapons begin to evolve, these battlefield firearms evolve, tactics revolve around them recently. As I mentioned a moment ago, that really changed the way the cavalry fought. Sometimes in a fallback defense situation, many of the officers might be armed with revolvers now instead of single-shot muzzleloader pistols. So six shots instead of one. Sometimes the capability to reload by changing out a cylinder was there. So think about that as you work through this too. Lots of tactics, lots of new ways of doing things were being invented as we move on. So again, three types of soldiers in the Mexican-American War: regulars, militia, and volunteers. We see a version of that going into the Civil War. One of the things we will focus on there is how, and I'll target the readings around this, how the states kind of built their militaries and built their armies. And there was if you look at the Civil War and you see this concept of young generals, many of these generals, many of them referenced even right here, are young men, relatively young men. In today's military, it's very uncommon to see someone obtain the rank of general before the 20-year mark in their career, 22-year mark in their career. Some of these men were majors, lieutenant colonels, captains in the regular army. They resigned from the regular army, and although they stayed with the Union, and this happened in the Confederacy as well, but they went to their state and obtained a much higher rank in their militia. So one might be a major, a lieutenant colonel, even a colonel in their unit. They might resign and go obtain a generalship in the state's militia, which then volunteered to go fight for the Union Army or Confederacy. So that happened. A lieutenant might be a major or a field grade officer in the grander scheme of things by leaving one organization and going over to their other. So that's cleaned up in today's military. That there are, for the most part, there are features in effect that keeps that from happening. But throw some names out here as you go through your readings for the week. Keep these names in mind. Move myself here. You see General McClellan there. So keep those men in mind as you go through the readings, and just remember that they all serve together in many capacities through the Mexican War. I will bring out to your attention Generals Grant and Lee. I'm circling them backwards, but General Lee and General Grant here on the paper and who they served with and for. So those two men, ultimately the Civil War ended whenever General Lee surrendered to General Grant. General Lee was actually offered command of the Union Army, but resigned to remain what he felt was loyalty to his home state of Virginia. And he commanded the Confederate Army from the very beginning to the end. He was there through the entirety of it. General Grant was not. He was installed in a leadership position very late in the war. Lots of great leadership lessons, if you want to study leadership, about General Grant can be learned from him. We've talked about this a little bit, but a couple of things I'll point out here is steam power became very prevalent during this time period. Railroads became powered by steam engines, by trains with steam engines, made them move across the battlefield or the nation much more rapidly. Steam engines on boats instead of just sailing before. You can see a steamboat with a paddle wheel behind it became prevalent and really helped the goods and the troops move up and down the waterways at an incredibly rapid pace. The mini ball, which was not named because it's small, it was named after Mr. Claude Minier. So technically it's the Minier ball. We all mostly mispronounce it, including myself right then. So the Minier ball really took rifled muskets to the next level and made them much more accurate. So this small indention in the bottom of that ball, when it is loaded on top of powder into this rifle, it's easy to load. If you remember, one of the things I talked about that made a musket more desirable over a rifle was you could load it faster. The barrel was smooth. The ball would, the ball would slide down into the barrel a lot quicker, with a lot less effort. Whereas that tight fit rifled ball would be really hard to ram down into the rifle. Well, the mini ball kind of bridged that gap, and it was conical in shape, which added to accuracy. But it was a little smaller. So a 58 caliber ball might be going into a barrel that was slightly larger than the ball was. And what would happen when the powder was ignited by this percussion cap, which was a new invention as well, when that powder was ignited by that percussion cap and this explosion happened, those gases would blow up into the bottom of that ball, and it would expand and grab those rifled grooves. It would help it fly much straighter. So now you had a rifle that could be reloaded quickly. Not to mention the fact that at this time in history, we were also developing breech loading muzzleloaders and rifles, breech loading rifles as well. So artillery became rifled as well. So instead of a smooth bore cannon, we now had longer, more accurate artillery that was adding to the lethality of the armies on the battlefield. So doctrine changed. So during this antebellum period, it's critical to note that many of the tactics were actually written down, and they were modernized versions that were accommodating for some of the advancements in weapons. But really, something that's as critical as their effectiveness and their advancements is the fact that they were written down. They were really building out this library, and I've got I even keep some military manuals, even at my desk, some for different references. So our Army today runs off manuals. Our entire military, I said Army, but our entire military relies on manuals. There's almost always a book to go to ask a question of if you have a question about it. So artillery tactics started becoming documented and written down into instruction booklets. So we're growing, we're progressing as a country, as an army, and these are in the years leading up to the Civil War. So we're really becoming a much more professional, more efficient military during this time period as well. We'll take a quick look at the road to the Civil War. I'm going to use your readings this week to become a little. We're not going to talk the American Civil War is too robust to talk about all the larger battles. This would be a 3-hour video, and it would be very difficult to watch. But I'm going to assign some of your readings about some of the key battles through it. But I do want to take a look at the overview, the road to the Civil War. So this goes back as far as 1820, and really before that, there was arguments, disputes over slavery and whether or not it was right and whether or not it should be legal. So in the Missouri Compromise of 1820, Missouri was admitted to the Union as a slaveholding state. Maine was admitted as a free state. The Compromise of 1850, and remember at the beginning I said that this westward expansion had some impact on the Civil War. There were disputes over slavery in newly acquired territory back to the admission of Missouri as a slaveholding state. The question is, do these states who are petitioning for as the purchase, the area, the region that Lewis and Clark had explored, become settled, and these areas start looking at statehood and adoption into the Union? the question becomes frequently, are they admitted as slave-owning states or not? So we see the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed territories to decide for themselves on whether or not they wanted to allow slavery. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled that African Americans were not U.S. citizens. So you'll read a little bit about Mr. John Brown in some of your readings for the week. And then Abraham Lincoln, who was an anti-slavery president, had a strong desire to preserve the Union as one and not allow the South to secede and form their own nation. He wanted one Union. Was elected in 1860. Tensions began to rise and kept rising until on April 12th of 1861, the Confederates actually fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and that was the official start of the American Civil War. So much of that page, much of the slide is going to be recounted in some of your readings. Again, this video is going to be a little more of an overview, less in depth on some of the battles, and some of your readings are going to take you deeper. So just a few of the battles I'm going to point out to you. Is the first Battle of Bull Run. It was the first major land battle. It was fought in Virginia. So both sides, the Union and the Confederacy, thought going into this is going to be a quick war. It's going to be just very quick in and out. They learned after this very long, bloody battle that it was not going to be at all. That it was going to be a long war. There are tales of folks coming out to watch it from a distance, even kind of making an event of the day. So it also highlighted the need for better training, and that both armies needed to be better equipped, better trained, and it kind of let the Union know that the Confederate Army was not going to be easy to just steamroll over, that they were an opponent worthy of respect and caution on the battlefield. Battle of Antietam is the single bloodiest day in American military history. But it did keep, fought in Maryland, it did repel Robert E. Lee's first attempt at invading the North. So it was significant. Gettysburg is the largest battle ever fought in North America. The Gettysburg Address came out of this, and really this was an opportunity for President Lincoln's leadership to be highlighted. Sherman's march to the sea and the devastation it left behind is critical to remember. You'll do a little bit of reading about that as well. And Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, and that's ultimately the end of the Civil War. It was then that General Lee surrendered to General Grant, and it marked the end of the war. So just some key battles to look at there. Quick look at resources here. The northern states were largely industrial. They had more resources. They had more industry. The South was generally agriculture, particularly relied on cotton production for the majority of its income. And something I want to point out here is that the Union held in much greater number of railroad mileage. 2.5 miles of railroad in the north to every 1 mile in the south meant troops and supplies could be moved much quicker. So it was critical. The telegraph. I'm going to throw a couple of videos up about the telegraph. President Lincoln used the telegraph to speak to his frontline commanders and receive battlefield updates in what for the time was a blistering speed, very quickly. So those were absolutely key to this battle, key to this war, and Lincoln's use of that really helped bring victory. He allowed his vision to be spread to the commanders on the ground. He was able to receive updates. Many times he even would sleep in the telegraph office and just to receive information as it came in. So many advancements in this time in the use of artillery, cavalry, and infantry. We're still using a version of the infantry line as the main fighting formation. supported by cavalry. Often cavalry would be used to exploit a weakness, many times on a flank or a side of the enemy that they were attacking. Artillery was used. Exploding shells started to come on the scene, and they were used in exploding shells have been on the scene, have been used, but they were commonly used during the Civil War. Grape shot is something that was used where it's a cluster of smaller balls instead of one larger, heavier cannonball. So we see great advancements here as well. Won't worry so much about that. We'll look just real quick at the infantry line. You're going to hold the reserve back there. This is going to be your actual skirmish line. The infantry at this time a regiment was typically two companies lined up into two ranks. They would hold a reserve in the back, hold a linear formation. Really, they just helped repulse that enemy attack typically, and it also kept crossfire from happening and helped the fire be more concentrated and spread out across the enemy attack. Command and control was incredibly difficult during this. It was loud. The orders were difficult to be heard, and so the officers really had the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, the NCOs in charge had to learn to relay those orders, and really their leadership was tested there. This graphic just shows, we talked about the rifling and the new range, and that big problem there is that increased range. So the volley fire started happening and was more devastating at greater distances than ever before. So that was a huge change in tactic. This graphic here, the smooth roundbore ball was effective out to 100. You were probably safe out here at 200. Now with the Minié ball, we moved that out to about 500 yards. So tactics had to advance, and they had to figure out how to compensate for that, how to deal with that. So the infantry had to learn to move quicker. They had, instead of walking slower, they had to move at a double quick pace, almost double their advancement speed. So if you're into historical manuals, Hardy's Rifle and Light Infantry Tactics would be a good read for you. All right, so as we look at this, we're looking at how basically the United States was divided into three separate theaters. The Eastern Theater, and up in here you had a significant amount of fighting, especially in this region where Lee is trying to move into the north and really hold this land of Virginia. This is called the Western Theater, and it is going to be where we ultimately see all right, so as we look at this graphic, and we also see the different theaters that okay. So as we look at this graphic, we see, and my map has slid just a little bit, but we see the Eastern Theater, which is right through here, the Western Theater, which is going to be these southern states on over to the west, and over here we see the Trans-Mississippi Theater. The bulk of the campaigns were fought around the outer edge of this, without a ton of major campaigns being fought right in the middle. Many smaller fights, smaller conflicts, but a bulk of them were fought around what we would look at as the outer edges of this map. So many of them, again, your readings will cover some more of those, but President Davis was, as the war progressed, he became increasingly concerned about the West, and that Western Theater from the slide before. Became increasingly concerned. General Lee was tied up here in the Virginia area trying to fight north. He'd been repelled twice, and that was a significant focal point for the South at that time. So we've got Grant moving into the West over there, and then we ultimately deal with Sherman's march to the sea that crippled the South and helped lead to the end of the war. The Emancipation Proclamation signed and was to take effect the first day of 1863, and that was an executive order, and it ultimately had very little teeth because it freed slaves that were in states, but states were already in rebellion. There's already a war going on, so there really wasn't a recourse for Lincoln to fall upon if they refused and they did not comply. So it allowed those freed slaves to join the Union Army. Significant in that it did free all the slaves in the southern state. Really more significant in as a gesture and more symbolic than anything. So it was an executive order. It was not a law passed by Congress. So had no immediate effect. Really no slaves were freed. Had a little bit of mixed reaction in the North, very strong reaction in the South, because the southern states considered themselves at that time a free country. Ultimately, they were dissolved when they surrendered to the Union. At that point in time, they felt that President Lincoln had absolutely no authority to enact any type of legislation in their country, in their freed states, they believed. So, what is significant here about the Union Army and their chain of command, their succession of command, is the fact that Lincoln really couldn't find a boss he liked. Nobody really made it. For a few months, each boss seemed to survive. Ultimately, they would get relieved. Someone else would be brought in. We see General Hooker here made a very arrogant statement that my plans are perfect. May God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I will have none. Bobby Lee being General Robert E. Lee. And Lincoln, I am in the way of that. But basically his statement says that that General Hooker was a little mouthy, probably spoke out of turn, probably shouldn't have been so loud and boisterous when he was. So that is a pretty bold statement. Ultimately got him replaced by this man, Ulysses S. Grant. If you want to dig into leadership, I would encourage you to study him. He is a very good leader. He dealt with a significant number of personal problems in his life that had really withheld his military career up until that point. And he was now standing leader, came in and kind of, I don't want to say turned the Union Army around, but kept it going, brought the fight to the Confederacy, and ultimately received Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Due in large part was Sherman's march to the sea, or his burning of Atlanta and many towns critical to the South. And that's kind of where that scorched earth concept comes in, total war concept. He went to the South, and very strong reactions to what he did there, but very devastating to the South. He made one final march towards the end of the war that kind of helped cripple the South and really helped turn the tide there. So ultimately we get to the surrender April 9th, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse. Very famous rendering of this. This was much has been written, much has been mentioned of this, but one thing I kind of want to point out is the General Lee, Robert E. Lee. He felt it was a very, very ceremonious occasion. He went dressed in his finest. He was a little taken aback at he felt he was treated a little curtly, maybe a little bluntly by the Union Army. He and Ulysses S. Grant had an encounter during the Mexican War, and I believe that Ulysses S. Grant probably didn't think too highly of General Lee and some of his statements. It was, again, General Grant was kind of looked down upon for a couple of reasons at that point in his military career, and I believe he probably felt a little slighted by Robert E. Lee at that point. So anyway, that's going to conclude the video portion. It's going to be heavy readings and some videos attached to this. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, email, drop them in the classroom chat or whatever. So thank you very much for taking your time to watch this.